Now, I'm not entirely sure how familiar you all might be with the Deus Ex series, and sorry, can I just point out, by the way, that's Deus Ex, not something sex, as my friends have oh so amusingly, repeatedly, seemingly refer to it as when I keep talking to them about it. I'll say, oh, this great game I've been playing, Deus Ex Human Revolution. What sex? Sorry, something sex? Oh, yeah, you could go on to Channel 5 with that kind of comedy. Anyway, to get on with things, the franchise is respected, for having a deep and complex narrative, but mostly for allowing players to choose their own approach to the missions that they take on in the game. If one word could be used to describe the Deus Ex franchise, I'd probably say that word would be freedom. Possibly just awesome. But I personally started back with the series way back in the year 2000, not that far back, but whatever. I personally started with it with the original game, Deus Ex, for the PC. I purchased the game upon its release, installed it, played it for half an hour, and felt very, very confused. Didn't really know what was going on. I basically just didn't get into it at all. But then I picked up another game off my shelf and played that instead, so it was all good ultimately. No, but basically, I was living with my parents. Disposable cash was plentiful, and if I didn't get into a game in the first half an hour, I'd basically just not bother playing it and just move on to something else. The number of games I had that were still in there shrink wrapping, never played, was ridiculous. In short, spoiled brat. Yeah, spoiled brat. Anyway, cut to 5 years later, and I decide, even though I was no longer living with my parents due to reasons of self-respect, but mostly reasons of wanting to bring women back at night. I was living by myself. I didn't have so much disposable cash, but nonetheless, I gave Deus Ex Invisible War, which is the sequel to Deus Ex, the game I did not get into. So yeah, I gave that a go, and this time I really got into it. I had a great time with it. I thought it was fantastic. And yeah, I just played that for ages, completed it, and that in turn actually kind of motivated me to give the original game another chance, even though I love the sequel so much. And in doing so, what I came to realise is what I'd been missing out on this whole time by not getting into the original, just giving it half an hour. It was that Deus Ex, the original, I came to realise, is a genre-defying experience. It's got all sorts of genres in there. You've got your role-playing, you've got your first-person shooter, your stealth, there's so much adventure game aspects, loads of stuff. And yeah, I just realised actually how the sequel, in retrospect, had been cut back quite a lot, or dumbed down, if you want to say that. But I was, I was still then savvy enough to understand and appreciate that this dumbing down, if you like, was no doubt caused by the limitations of Invisible War being, primarily a console game. Like I said, I owned it for the Xbox. So therefore I think they were somewhat limited by the potential size of the environments they could create, and and also probably, let's face it, pandering to the more mass market console centric crowd that are fed on a diet of first person shooter games, murder frenzied, rah. But it's not to say that Invisible War didn't also offer plenty of brains to go with its brawn. It certainly did that. It was a lot more simplified and perhaps a little more action orientated by its design than the original Deus Ex actually had been. I think it became clear that the reason I'd shunned Deus Ex initially and got into Invisible War when I first played that was it's due to the learning curve of Invisible War and the general accessibility of it. Deus Ex, it's a better game. Frankly, the original is better than the sequel, but the learning curve is, when you first play it, it's not gentle at all. It is really, I think, for the uninitiated, like I was back when I first played it, it's a daunting prospect playing that game for the first time. But anyway, I digress, because the reason I'm doing this segment is to review the third game in the series, which was recently released, called Deus Ex Human Revolution. Now, this is available for the Xbox 360, the PC, and what I'll be reviewing is the PS3 version. This game, Human Revolution, it acts as a prequel, essentially, to the original Deus Ex. But much like the Star Wars prequels, oddly, the technology that we see in this game is far in advance in the prequel, is far in advance of what we saw in the game that's supposedly set 25 years later. And I know that, much like, again, Star Wars, the fanboys, perhaps is a better word, will try and say, well, that's due to the war and oppression that occurred in the intervening years set between those two games or films. But okay, I guess that's an argument, but my argument would be that's complete and utter bullshit. It's basically, we've got more technology now, we can create more complex environments, and ultimately, with Deus Ex Human Revolution, it doesn't matter, because unlike the Star Wars prequels, what Human Revolution offers is a wonderfully executed return to a much loved universe that we've explored before. It's not like Star Wars, where it's this isn't what I saw in the first films. Whatever you think, whatever. I don't want to talk about Star Wars. Not even a big fan of it. It's just, I don't want to get down that road. Anyone who's been on the forum and has seen the Star Wars thread, and okay, I've been guilty of partaking a bit, but Jesus Christ. Okay, so Deus Ex. Fuck Star Wars. Deus Ex. Right, okay, so Deus Ex, it kicks off with a rather linear introduction. It acts as really essentially a very lengthy tutorial. And it literally goes on for hours. I mean, this is crazy. And I was initially thinking, this isn't Deus Ex. This is at best Mass Effect, or at worst just another generic FPS game. But after a fair few hours, it does open up back into its traditional sandbox elements from the first two games, but with some really quite nice modern gameplay techniques, such as the cover system, regenerating health, and it's all pulled off quite nicely. Cover system takes a little while to get into, but once you do, it's all good. It's actually really quite satisfying just playing this game and using the cover system to your advantage. However, where it might be it's always been hard to summarise the Deus Ex games to someone who's never played them before. In this case, I'm going to say kind of offers the immersion and the sandbox element of games such as Fallout or the Elder Scrolls series, but where Human Revolution differs from those particular two series is through its use of much more confined spaces and environments. There were two, by the way, there were two city hubs in Human Revolution, those being Montreal and Shanghai. And there's a number of smaller locations, you know, like typical stuff, docks and military bases. But it's through Deus Ex's use of these more confined, less like you've got a whole world to explore, but rather you've got a city to explore. It's through that slightly smaller environment that it allows them to create the environments which in turn allow you to take multiple paths through each and every situation that you encounter in the game. So, you know, it's not just like there's one or two ways to solve a mission. It's kind of really down to you how you want to tackle it. And the freedom in the game that you're offered, it goes far beyond, you know, just your ability to sneak through vents or bust in through the front door, all guns blazing, and blow them away. Although it does offer that, you know, it also comes down, for example, with dealing with the various inhabitants of this game's world, whether that would be a hostile terrorist or just a passive civilian.